As the U.S. and others accuse China of what they call a lack of transparency, the war of words over the origins of the outbreak escalates, but should be finger-pointing the right way and while the epidemic still rages on. Is China's best move to refuse to play the blame game? How close are we to tracking down patient zero of COVID-19? And would finding the first case end the finger-pointing? To talk about these issues and more, I'm joined by Dr. Dennis Carroll, president of the Global Viral Project, Dr. Huazhen Zhu from the University of Hong Kong, Dr. Elisabetta Grappelli from St. George's University of London, and Professor Jared Kirsch from Boston University. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhu Yue. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo recently claimed there is enormous evidence that COVID-19 outbreak began in a laboratory in Wuhan, but he failed to offer any substantial proof. So, Dr. Zhu, what do you make of this kind of accusation without scientific proof?
Okay, I would say that it's easy to criticize, but this will create a very dangerous or even devastating atmosphere for the scientists. As any labs that possess any kind of infectious samples may potentially be the next victim. So whoever did the better job and found more viruses will become the biggest suspect. So if so, who will bother to do good science and to tell the truth to the people? And I think actually the Wuhan lab has already done quite a great job during the COVID-19 outbreak. So they deserve our respect and acknowledgement rather than criticism or suspicion without any evidence or proof.
Let's first take a listen at what Mike Pompeo has said about the reasons why he suspected the Wuhan lab.
Have you seen anything that gives you high confidence that it originated in that Wuhan lab?
Remember, China has a history of infecting the world, and they have a history of running substandard laboratories. These are not the first times that we've had a world exposed to viruses as a result of failures in a Chinese lab. And so while the intelligence committee continues to do its work, they should continue to do that and verify so that we are certain. I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan. But the best experts so far seem to think it was man-made. I have no reason to disbelieve that at this point.
The scientific consensus was not man-made or genetically modified.
That's right. I agree with that. Yeah, I've seen their analysis. I've seen the summary that you saw that was released publicly. I have no reason to doubt that that is accurate at this point.
Okay, so just to be clear, you do not think it was man-made or genetically modified?
I've seen what the intelligence committee has said. I have no reason to believe that they've got it wrong.
Dr. Carroll, what do you think of the record of Chinese running viral labs?
Well, first off, I think that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence for the United States just past week issued a report where, one, they did confirm their belief that this was a natural virus, very much consistent with the scientific community's judgment. But they also took a step further and said that there was no evidence at this point to suggest one way or the other the involvement of a laboratory. So I think at this point we're hearing from the Secretary of State a conclusion that our intelligence community has not drawn based on any available evidence.
So is it reasonable to believe this is political motivated without any sound scientific proof that it has anything to do with the lab in Wuhan?
Well, I think it's clear from the intelligence report there is not at this point any scientific proof. So one can speculate that the reasons behind the statements made by the Secretary of State have more to do with politics than any scientific evidence, yes.
From a scientific point of view, why it is almost agreed upon that this virus is actually a product of natural evolution rather than human engineering?
Well, I mean, it's You know, the COVID-19 virus is not unique. There are any number of additional coronaviruses which have been discovered by the Wuhan lab and other researchers, both in China and outside of China. And so what we see genetically when we look at the COVID-19 virus is part of a larger pool of viruses circulating in Asia, in bats, that have all of the genetic similarities that would suggest that this is very much a natural virus.
And do you know anything about what is being researched in the Wuhan Viral Lab in terms of bat coronavirus?
Well, my understanding is that they're really trying to understand the how widely distributed coronaviruses are within China, understanding how many of those viruses have genetic similarities to SARS and MERS. So they're really trying to help us understand what's the relative risk of coronaviruses, what's their natural circulation within the ecosystem within China, and how they might be able to use that scientific insight to better prevent and control future outbreaks.
But Dr. Drew, for the lay persons, they associate the outbreak of this COVID-19 with the Wuhan lab simply because the lab has research projects on the coronavirus from bats, and also it is located very near to a wet market in Wuhan. What do you make of this kind of reasoning?
Okay, so I would say that Wuhan is actually located in the center of China. So it is a highly dense populated region. So it is not that surprising if we can have a virus first emerge in a highly populated region. That's the first reason. And then I also think that because the scientists and also the CDC officers, they are doing a good job, so they can first report and detect a novel virus, because you know that actually detecting a completely unknown virus, it is a challenge in many countries, especially the developing country. So I think that just based on the location that Wuhan lab is in the outbreak region, that is not a sensible reason to accuse them.
And also yeah, go ahead, Dr. Drew.
Yes, and I would say that actually the SARS-like virus has already been detected since year 2005 in many different places. For example, in Hong Kong, in Yunnan, in Zhejiang, or even in the Eurasia continent. Other countries in Eurasia continent. So I think that this type of virus, they exist in nature, but our understanding of this virus is not that sufficient. For example, we have just recently detected SARS-like coronavirus or the COVID-19-like virus in the pangolin. So we have so many unknown questions in nature. But how could you just directly point the fingers to a lab who is doing good science?
And also the blame goes the other way. Dr. Carroll, the lab, the U.S. biowarfare lab at Fort Detrick in Maryland is just doing research on coronavirus. That lab was cited by the U.S. Center for Disease Control in 2019 for failure to maintain their containment standards and shut down in November. So some citation refer to the lab's sterilization plan has been linked to COVID-19. So if the U.S. is demanding China allow an investigation of the Wuhan lab, should the Chinese also ask the U.S. To investigate into Fort Detrick?
Well, I think there's a larger issue.
Dr. Carroll?
That is, yes, I think there's a larger issue. I think the biosecurity of high containment labs is something we should all be concerned about. And wherever there is work going on,
There's a siren blaring.
Wherever there is work, there is a site. Yes, apologize. Wherever there is important scientific work going on, trying to understand these high consequence pathogens, we have to be very certain that the laboratory procedures, regardless of where they are, in the United States, China, Germany, Brazil, we have to have very strong standards to ensure biosecurity for all laboratories. And I think, if anything, this discussion about biosecurity issues around the COVID-19 virus should highlight our shared concern that we all need to ensure good biosecurity regardless of what country is involved.
So you should be country blind. You shouldn't just level accusations at a lab in China. Every lab should maintain safety procedures the same.
Absolutely. And we find this is a collective vulnerability. Look, research into viruses of this type are critical if we are in fact going to protect the world from future threats. But we need to make sure that the laboratories and the procedures in those laboratories are abiding by the highest possible standards. And rather than blame each other about potential failures, we should be working together as a global community to really ensure the safety of these labs. It's really to the benefit of humanity that this work goes on, but it goes on in the safest and most secure way. It should not be part of politics. Yeah,
Dr. Zhu, I saw that you had something to say.
Oh, I would say that actually, even for this lab in US, currently we also don't have any evidence or proof. So it is not right to directly accuse them. And I think that if anyone suspects that there might be a leaking from the lab, they could request for investigation and conducted by the real experts, not just like directly.
Okay. And this issue has generated a lot of buzz on the internet. Let's take a look at what some of them have been saying about the origin of this SARS-CoV-2, which has resulted in COVID-19 around the world. This tumbleweed journey said, how about declassified Fort Detrick and let the world know what safety breaches took place for last August for it to be shut down. And then mysterious pneumonia-like illness caused by vaping appeared in September, and to this day no one knows what it was and what happened with it after. So Dr. Carroll, here in China people wondered whether there were originally community-based spread of COVID-19 in America in early December already in the U.S., and is it something that has to do with the wrong diagnosis of flu patients? What do you think?
Well, I think it's clear that the cases of COVID-19 in the United States, and I would say in China, are earlier than the reports that we've initially received. COVID-19 disease presents very similarly to influenza, and it's perfectly understandable that clinicians presented with patients infected with the COVID-19 virus in China and in the United States early on would have misdiagnosed that disease as influenza. So it's more than likely that as we go back and look at samples from earlier cases, earlier in January and December, it would not surprise me to find that there was examples of COVID-19 infections in the United States. And I think
are we already doing that?
Also consider there is work trying to better understand when the COVID-19 virus was introduced. And I think in China, the same kind of work is going on. The first public awareness, the first diagnosis was in December. But again, this was in the influenza season, and it's perfectly reasonable to presume that earlier in November, maybe even in October, that this virus was already infecting people, but not recognized because it was essentially being misinterpreted as influenza. It's always one of the challenges of novel respiratory infections being misidentified as an influenza.
And in February, Dr. Zhong Nanshan, that's China's Anthony Fauci, he said, though COVID-19 was first discovered in China, it does not mean it originated in China. So, Dr. Carroll, is it possible that the virus has been circulating anywhere in the world before we now believe it is where it is?
I think it's extraordinarily unlikely. This is a virus, as the scientists in Wuhan, who have been doing brilliant work over the years on coronaviruses, have shown us very similar viruses circulating in horseshoe bats in China. And its pedigree is very similar to what we know about coronaviruses. So, yes, it was circulating, but it was circulating in all likelihood in horseshoe bats. Somewhere in the fall of this past year, there was a spillover event that introduced it into a human population. And I think there's no question that that spillover event initiated in China and then began to spread.
Dr. Zhu, you agree this is actually spillover from horseshoe bat from humans last year?
Yes, I think that it could be possible this virus first infects some person or some other kind of intermediate host, and then by some chance it arrived at Wuhan and then caused the big outbreak there. But we don't know about the ecology and also the real distribution of this virus in nature. So that's something we have to do.
So, Dr. Carroll, what kind of event should it be when the spillover happened? And can we have 100% proof of when and how it happened and where?
Well, it's unlikely we'll ever have 100% proof. But I think it's really critical to understand how the virus was introduced into the human population. I think it's important to understand that because this spillover event is not the last time we will see such an event. And understanding how this virus introduced into the human population may help us better prevent future spillovers. Again, spillovers are not uncommon. We see them happening not just in China, around the world. And the more we understand where they're happening and how they're happening, it's information that allows us to better prevent and detect these events earlier and make sure that you never have a kind of out-of-control spread of a virus of this type.
Then what are the most critical information we have to acquire to understand this virus and prevent similar events from happening again?
Well, we need to go back and really trace where the very first cases occurred. As we were talking about just a few minutes ago, the first clinical identification of the COVID-19 infection occurred in December, but in all likelihood, people were previously infected in November, maybe even in October.
Yeah, there are reports of early infections elsewhere, for example, in France and in California. But we can never know.
Well, they're earlier than our...
When is the earliest
case, we can, I think with good investigative techniques, we can go back and identify approximately where the earliest spillover event occurred. That is doable, but it requires coordinated scientific investigation. And I think that is an activity that would be enhanced if, in fact, because of the global nature of this pandemic, it would be an important scientific step if the investigation led by the Chinese investigators, but included independent scientists from around the world to make sure we collectively understand these risks for the future.
We have another guest, Dr. Elisabetta Gruppelli, on the line. So, Dr. Gruppelli, we've been talking about scientists should join hands to investigate the origin of this virus. how long do you think that process will take, and what is it like? Where should we start, and what is the process?
So it's a great pleasure to be able to join you. When it comes to the global scientific effort, of course, it has to be coordinated and joined. And I think what we're seeing now is that a massive effort of many labs all over the world actually analyzing the samples coming from infected patients. And this is, and by analyzing, I mean sequencing, so reading the genetic information, because that allows us to see exactly the sequence of the virus and potentially to trace where a virus is from. However, of course, this just gives us a snapshot of the samples that have been collected in the last 4 or 5 months, maybe. But of course, it's important that we also look at animal reservoirs, because we know that the coronaviruses do circulate in humans, in animals, and do like to jump into humans. So a coordinated effort that look at the samples right now, but also a way from humans into animals will certainly be required.
But how big is this reservoir of animal hosts, and how extensive should we be conducting this investigation?
So the correct size of this animal reservoir, of course, we do not know. What we can realistically say is that we are very much underestimating the number of coronaviruses and the number of viruses actually in animals that actually have the potential of jumping into humans. So in terms of animals, it's generally, of course, because we are mammals, it's always a good idea to start with those animals that do have something in common with us. But for other viruses like flu, for example, we know that birds are a very important intermediate host for human viruses. And therefore, basically, we can go as wide as the world, and looking at all mammals and birds is certainly to start identifying those viruses. However, of course, because resources are not are finite, it's important that we look at those animals where we can actually come into contact with. And in the Western world, it tends to be obviously birds in terms of chickens or companion animals. But when it comes to other parts of the world, including Africa and Asia, where the nature is different, interactions of humans with nature is different when it comes to food and meat, and that is it's very crucial to go and look at those animal species for which viruses they harbor, and therefore trying to understand the potential for harming us.
And Dr. Carroll, you've been working on virus for quite some time. What do you think are the potential candidates for the intermediate host of this new coronavirus?
Well, I mean, there are obviously many potential intermediary hosts. We've heard some suggestion that pangolin might be involved. We saw with SARS that civet cats might be involved. But I would like to go back to this larger question that, the threat of emerging viral diseases, the spillover of viruses from wildlife into human populations, because of population pressure, we're seeing more and more of these events occur. And it's really critical that we as a global community stop being in a position where we wait and react for when these spillover events occur. We have been doing work with our colleagues in China and elsewhere over the last 2 decades, which has given us much more insight into really how many viruses are circulating in wildlife around the world. And what it would take in order to better document and characterize those viruses that could pose to be a future threat to people. And we've worked quite closely with the China Centers for Disease Control, as well as with the Chinese Academy of Sciences, to begin forming a partnership between China and other countries around the world to begin documenting what those viral threats look like in wildlife and better understand what those spillover events might look like in the future, so we can prepare and prevent these events from ever happening again. So it's doable, it's feasible, and the COVID-19 pandemic should only highlight the importance of knowing our future viral threats today before they spill over into us tomorrow.
And Dr. Carroll, let's also look at the performance, the behavior of this virus, because the genetic analysis of it indicates that there are 3 strains, A, B, and C, B being dominated, the dominant strain in Wuhan. B is listed evolving slowly in China and quickly outside China. But how can we explain the biological terms of the evolution of this virus, different strains?
Right. Well, the virus evolves as it passes from one person to another. And since the virus spread out of China, there have been an additional 3 million people who have been infected. At least these have been documented through diagnosis. So we've seen a dramatic increase in the overall number of people infected and the serial transmission of this virus from one person to another. So each time this virus spreads, it evolves, it has the potential to diverge from its original primary viral host. So this is a natural consequence of repeated human-to-human transmission. So again, in China, 80 to 100,000 people were infected. There are now 3.5 million people infected around the world. So significant evolutionary pressures through that human-to-human transmission.
Yes, indeed, and numbers is very important. And also, Dr. Grappelli, Ursula von der Leyen, that's the head of the EU's executive branch, said that she would like to see China work with her organization and other international institutions to get to the bottom of this problem, how the virus emerged. Do you think this project will work? In what way?
So I think that the practicalities of this are actually much more complicated than the beautiful idea that it is. The reality is that it would be for the benefit of the world to put all the efforts together to see and to try to find out where this virus has come from and how transmission has or the spillover into the human population has occurred. And this, I want to stress, is not to identify, investigate in order to blame, but it's very much to investigate to learn, so that we know better how these events occur, and therefore we understand them better, and we can try to harness and not be caught so unprepared next time. Collaborations among scientists, as we've heard, do occur, and between labs in the entire world. However, they are normally supported by individuals. It's normally individual scientists who happens to have nice connections with someone in the rest of the world, and then they use maybe some funding that is actually available for the entire world, and so not just nationally, that can actually support this type of research. It's certainly a very, very complex funding and research area, but it's certainly now, with this pandemic, it's something that all nations need to look at how to make it happen effectively.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Grappelli, and thank you, Dr. Carroll, for your insights and discussions. You've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Zhu in Beijing. Goodbye.